on raising the debt limit. And the question is, what will Republicans do? I think what they do is largely going to be influenced by what the American people do between now and then. But the reality that I'm trying to get people to embrace is, rather than pick apart the Obama accomplishments, achievements, if you will, over the last 3 years, Obamacare and so forth and so on, one by one, this is the magic bullet. We can get rid of all of them because they all require more money than the Treasury takes in through tax revenues. So it's a matter of starving the beast. By the way, this would be a good thing no matter who is president, okay? This would have been a good thing to do during the Bush administration, which also overspent. But now it's in crisis mode. Our country is going off the cliff. And I believe that if we continue the kind of pressure we've built over the last year and can magnify it, we can change the culture, the political culture in Washington. We can change the political culture of the Republican establishment, which is basically a business as usual mindset. That's what we've got to empower these guys to do the right thing, to live up to their rhetoric of smaller government, constitutional government. Honestly, I think this is the best way. I think this is better than getting a Republican elected as president who's going to try to piecemeal, their agenda in place. The best way is to recognize there are limited resources. The American people are not there to just be soaked, bled dry, and sustain the unsustainable policies that we've seen in Washington for too long. So that is, in a nutshell, the overview of what the No More Reading campaign is. It's very radical, but it's also very, very popular. Those polls are undeniable. We've looked at them for over a year now. They're always the same. We just conducted another one at WND. Shows the same thing. 80% of Republicans, 70% of independents, at least 50% of Democrats are for it. What could be a more popular issue for Republicans to get behind? So what they need is they need a push. They need a push from the grassroots. They need a push from organizations that you all represent. And they need, and the other critical component is to help us get people to sign this No More Reading pledge, this No More Borrowing pledge, because it's much more difficult to go back on a written pledge. And I want to make this, a very interactive session while we're here. I want to introduce some key people in this movement, some friends of mine who've been very supportive, and introduce them and let them say a few words. I'm going to start with Floyd Brown of the Western Journalism Center, who's here in the front row. He's on board with this campaign. And Floyd, you want to take the mic? This is critical for the parade.
Thank you, Joseph. And let me just start by saying it's my great pleasure today to endorse the No More Reading campaign. And I want to share with you just a couple of reasons why I think this campaign is so important and so significant as we go into this most important election year. First, let's just do a little history. I came to my first CPAC in 1981, and at that CPAC, the keynote speaker was Ronald Reagan. And Ronald Reagan had a few really grand and important strategic ideas, and he focused on those ideas, and as a result, he had a successful presidency. I believe the No More Reading campaign is the type of strategic campaign that Ronald Reagan would love. And the reason he would love it is because it's, first of all, simple. Second of all, it's easy to understand and digest. It's something the American people can get on board about. And that's why I think Ronald Reagan would absolutely love what we're doing here today in promoting and working towards this No More Reading campaign. And thinking about that history since 1981 to today, I have seen a dramatic change in the Republican Party. And part of that metamorphosis is watching the Republican Party change itself from an insurgency to a party that has become the party of Washington, D.C., and the party of the elite, and the party of the corrupt, and the party of the insiders. And this is a chance for us to pull our movement, our people, away from this corrupt system that perpetually is just fleecing the American people. This is really the only way. It's absolutely strategically brilliant, and that's why, Joseph, I just applaud you for taking the lead in this. One more thing I'd like to say, and then I'll turn it back over to you. You know, it has been very difficult to see these changes, and it's been very difficult to watch people like Congressman John Boehner, the current Speaker of the House, take the Republican Party in a way that embraces big government, big spending, and it's been absolutely relentless. Right now, they're working with the Obama administration to try and figure out a way that they can pass a massive stimulus pork barrel transportation program that busts all of the budgets. When they know the American people want this to end, they're trying to figure out a way behind the scenes to cut another deal with Barack Obama. Now, there's only one city in America that's having economic prosperity right now. We're in it. It's Washington, D.C. The rest of the country's hurting. The rest of the country has been bled dry. The rest of the country has had enough. But you see, what the No More Reading campaign does is changes the dynamic. After we stop the borrowing, the only city in America that will be having economic problems is Washington, D.C., the capital. And you're going to see a renaissance around the country in places like Chicago and Los Angeles and Boston and Miami, because all of a sudden the dynamic will change. And the dynamic that will change is no longer will Washington, D.C. be a parasite sucking the country dry so they can live like kings back here inside the Beltway, and will reorder things and put government back in its right perspective. So, Joseph, thank you for taking the lead on this, and I want to do everything I can to help you and help WND make this a reality.
I want to introduce another supporter of the campaign, Joe Miller, who many of you know was the Republican nominee to be the senator from Alaska. We all know what happened with that campaign, where the Republican establishment did not help the nominee of their party. And in fact, you know, Lisa Murkowski, who is really one of the significant problems that we have in Washington on the Republican side, was reelected through a write-in vote. Joe, would you say hi?
Well, I want to thank Joseph and WorldNet Daily for putting on this campaign. I think it's a phenomenal campaign. It's one that creates accountability, and we need that now. I mean, what we're faced with today is an issue which is really our number one national security issue. A lot of people think, oh, it's terrorism. You know, it's the threat of radical Islam, and I do see it as a threat. But the number one threat to our country and its success, its future success, is the national debt. How many of you know that our debt ratio, and I'm talking about future unfunded obligations compared to future revenues, is higher than Greece's? It's higher than Greece's. I mean, we've got a terrible problem. By some estimates, well over $200 trillion. For me, it's not just an issue of not being able to balance budgets, not being able to pay for the very national defense to defend this country, but it's also a moral issue. It's one of the mainstays of the campaign that I had in Alaska that, look, we can't go on and expend this money of future generations and expect us to have a successful country in the future. It's not fair for us to steal from future generations. But the establishment, whether it's on the left or right, doesn't support that. One of the reasons why that establishment support was not out there for me is because of the fact that I called out the establishment on the issue of government spending. We know that on the right, those that are established in positions want to see continued government spending. And why is that? Well, they've got all sorts of cronies. They've got all sorts of folk that support them in future races. They know that are dependent on it. They themselves are. I mean, the whole ruling class is built on government funding. And we've got to get control of it. And the great thing about this campaign is it puts people's names on the line. You put that before them, you say, hey, look, are you really against government expenditures? I don't want to see this resolution in the House about whether or not you're for the increase in the debt level. I want you to put down on paper, in pen and ink, that you're against increasing the debt limit, increasing future government spending beyond the revenues that we have. It's critical that we have that accountability. We're at a point in our country where if we don't get control of this country's going down the tube. And the only way that we can do that is to have accountability on those that we elect. Now, one of the other things, Joseph, that I see very attractive about this campaign is it creates, I think, a major coalition. Conservative base with a Tea Party base. I mean, this is the major issue for the Tea Party. For those that have been involved from the very beginning, 2-3 years ago, it's been the debt. And, you know, I think it's a simple issue. It's not just the fact that we don't spend more money than what we bring in. It's an issue of looking at government agencies and saying, are these constitutionally authorized? Are the enumerated powers in the Constitution, does it reflect what these agencies are involved in? Get rid of them. Get rid of them if they aren't there. It's a good first start. Now, my concern is if we don't get control of this situation, the end result is going to be calamity to this country. And I'm not just talking about a slow decline. I'm talking about a collapse. And who wants a collapse? We don't want to have anarchy. We don't want to have all of a sudden government services ending. What we want to do is do this in a responsible fashion. And the only way that that's going to happen is if we have men and women of courage in Congress that actually look at this for the threat it is. So I applaud you, Joseph. Thank you for the campaign, and I'm proud to be part of it. Thank you.
And Joe mentioned, Tea Party groups embracing this movement, and in fact, I agree that the Tea Party movement, at its very core, at its very genesis, was about this issue primarily, because this isn't just an economic issue, by the way. It's a liberty issue, as Joe points out. When you eliminate government agencies that are unconstitutional, that are infringing upon our personal liberties, you have done a very positive thing. It's not a negative thing. This is wonderful. This is what made this country great. I want to introduce another friend and supporter of the program, Judson Phillips from Tea Party Nation, to say a few words.
Joseph, thank you so very much. 3 years ago this month, the Tea Party was born. We came out into the streets. The motivating issue was spending and debt. We haven't forgotten about that, but the debt's gotten a lot worse. We put a whole bunch of folks in Congress last year, and guess what? I guess it's 2010, 2 years ago. Guess what? They ignored what we the people said. So we got to get their attention. The only way we're ever going to stop spending is to cut the money supply off. End of discussion. It is that simple. That's why I love this idea. Joseph sent me an email about it, and as soon as he told me about it, I said, hey, I'm on with this, because this is a tactic that works. Saul Alinsky said a great tactic is a tactic that works. I believe in stealing a few pages from the enemy's playbook. How about y'all? Let's get something that works, and this will work. Let's get these folks on board. From Tea Party Nation, we are all in with the No More Red Ink campaign, and since the next vote is going to be coming a couple of weeks after the election, I can safely say all I want for Christmas is no more red ink. Thank you.
The good news is that every single day we're hearing from new organizations, more organizations, individual leaders, across this country who are embracing this plan. And I want to enlist all of you here today to get behind it in any way you can. Some of you are organizational leaders. Some of you are just people of influence in your communities and constituencies nationally. This is a program that is not going to succeed on the basis of what I do. I'm doing all I can, but it really does mean people who are passionate about this need to get involved. And there's a couple of ways you can do that. Number one, you can participate in that grassroots online lobbying. It's really an ingenious program, and I can't take credit for conceiving it, but we have tested this program with other campaigns. We did it in 2009 with it was called the Pink Slip campaign, where we delivered 9 million pink slips to members of the Congress, warning them that if they did not take the message that the Tea Party was delivering to them, that they'd get their pink slip in November 2010, and a lot of them did. And so it was a real wake-up call. And we decided to take the infrastructure of that campaign and turn it into something much more positive, not just a warning, not just a big blast of mail that was delivered to Congress. By the way, 2.5 times, if you put those sheets of paper, stack them, it would be 2.5 times the size of the Washington Monument. So it does have an impact. The volume of mail going to congressional offices, obviously they don't have to read it. They just have to see it, and it has an impact on them. So every day we're enlisting new people. In fact, Grover Norquist, who is here at this conference today, who conceived the No New Tax Pledge, is supportive of this effort. And we're enlisting organizations like Heritage and Cato to start to put out policy papers that explain to members of Congress and the American people that it is okay, that it will not be the end of the world if we can't borrow more money. The end of the world comes if we continue to borrow more money. And there's a lot of receptivity to that. In fact, I will tell you that in 2011, the Heritage Foundation did do some good policy work on this. When Wall Street was creating hysteria and telling members of Congress that if they didn't raise the debt limit, our credit rating will go down. That'll be the first thing that happens. Of course, days after they raised the debt limit, the credit rating was downgraded. So, the cause and effect is just the opposite. Financial institutions understand that this is an unsustainable policy at the end of the day. I want to open it up to questions and comments. And Dave Capellian, do you want to say a few words? Sure. Okay.